Armed Kurdish groups in Iraq are preparing a cross-border operation in Iran, threatening to open a new front in the escalating war. Two senior sources within the Kurdish coalition have told the ABC they'll enter Iran as soon as they have sufficient US and Israeli air support. These Iranian Kurdish opposition groups, based on the Iran-Iraq border, have been training to mount an attack in the hope of weakening Tehran's military. The Kurds are one of the world's biggest ethnic groups, spread across Iran, Iraq, Syria and Turkey. They form about 10% of the Iranian population and for decades have fought the regime for autonomy. Iran's Kurdish regions have been a focal point in recent anti-government protests that saw thousands of people killed. They were also pivotal in the 2022 wave of unrest triggered by the death in custody of Iranian Kurdish woman Mahsa Amini. US President Donald Trump has said he fully supports the Kurds joining the war, but hasn't said whether the US would provide air cover. James Jeffrey is a former Deputy US National Security Advisor and was also a US ambassador to Iraq and Turkey. He's told the ABC he isn't convinced the Kurds will be able to play a major role in the conflict.
And I spent 40 years dealing with the Kurds in Turkey, Iraq, and Syria. The Iranian Kurds are a different group, but the main armed force is a PKK offshoot, which is the Turkish terrorist organization that has been largely wiped out by Turkey and is now in peace talks with Ankara. They're not a particularly powerful force. They don't have a lot of credibility in the Kurdish areas of Iran, let alone the rest of the country. And the Kurds make up less than 10% of the Iranian population. I see this as a Washington propaganda gambit.
The coalition of Iranian Kurdish groups has denied US media reports that the CIA is working to arm them. But James Jeffrey says it is likely the US is in talks with the group.
I was a diplomat for many years. We talked to everybody, including our enemies, if not diplomats. The CIA does, and that's a good thing, but it doesn't lead to much.
Expert in Middle East politics, Dr. Martin Kear, says it's unrealistic for Kurdish troops to take over Iran.
Well, there are numerous Kurdish groups around the autonomous region in northern Iraq that have identified or volunteered to participate in any incursion into Iran. So there are numerous groups in there. This is no unified command. So the US is talking to a number of groups up there.
What help is the US offering to these groups?
Well, at this stage, I think it's unclear exactly what US assistance would look like. Would it be arming those groups? Would it be providing air support? Perhaps a mixture of the two, but it's really difficult to say until it actually happens.
And do we know if Kurdish groups have agreed to cooperate with the US?
They have agreed to cooperate, but I think exactly what an incursion would look like, if indeed there is an incursion by Kurdish groups into northern Iran, is difficult to say. The Iraqi government has said that they would not allow movement across the Iran borders for so-called terrorist groups to move backwards and forwards. So that's an additional layer of complexity to factor in.
How fragmented are these Kurdish groups? Are they likely to work together or in opposition in any bid to overthrow the Iranian regime?
Again, I think it's difficult to say. I think there would be a level of cooperation to start with, but if there's any significant military action with Iranian forces and what that looks like and what support, air support in particular, or ground support even, that the United States or Israel is willing to provide would also be an additional factor. If it's just them alone fighting the Republican Guard or the Iranian army, I think there would be the increased prospect of splintering then, particularly if one group starts taking more casualties than another group.
So is it an unrealistic request by the US to these groups to go in and do the job?
Well, I think it would be unrealistic to expect the Kurdish groups to be able to actually overthrow the Iranian regime. I think it's more another problem that the Iranians would have to counter. The Israeli and Americans have been pounding their military, so the ability for the Iranian military to operate freely is constricted. That's an added layer of complexity. The Kurdish people really only have tens of thousands of armed fighters, but at best they're a moderately trained militia with no heavy weapons.
So their resources are a few the US would presumably bolster.
Well, again, it depends on what I would be surprised if the US provided heavy weapons. It's more likely going to be air support, but there would have to be some coordination with that. So you would expect perhaps US advisors on the ground if it got really serious. But again, there's lots of moving parts, and it's difficult to really see how everything will unfold until it actually does.
Yeah. And what action is Iran taking against these groups to prevent any uprising against the regime?
Well, there have been reports that the Iranian regime are moving forces into northern Iran to bolster their own forces up there. There's been reports of missiles being launched at cities in the Kurdish autonomous zone in northern Iraq as a signal that the Iranians are taking this seriously. But again, they're being constrained by the military action of the United States and Israel.
Dr. Martin Kear, thank you so much.
No, thank you.